It's too late now. So I'm going to share my screen so we can go through the agenda, and I'll be looking at the same thing. So thanks for joining the first code review weekly workshop. The intent of this is knowledge sharing, what we learn and gather during code review, because a lot of that I think we learn on the job of code review, but maybe we could be more intentional with broadcasting some things that we've learned. So the intent of our time here is split up into two phases. We'll have like a show and tell phase where we're sharing just directionally, hey, here's something that happened and something to keep in mind and to think about. I don't anticipate these to generate a lot of discussion, and I might prompt discussion to happen more asynchronously because I want people to feel really comfortable to bring things up and not feel like they're going to be challenged. And so anything you want to bring up, you don't have to prepare it. Please don't prepare something special because you'll just make others feel like they have to do that. If you have something special, please share it, and I want to see it. But just dropping a link is definitely enough. Then we'll have where we're just pairing on reviews. And so if you've ever joined our front end pairing or our back end pairing sessions, these are a lot of fun. Someone is driving, the rest of the mob are navigating, and it's just a lot of fun. But this will be a little different because we're going to pair on code reviews. So there's a little bit of a challenge here where we're a mixed bag of back-end engineers and front-end engineers. So the goal is not to get too technical because I know back-end engineers can't write front-end code. I'm sorry, back-end engineers, I'm giving you a hard time. Front-end engineers can't write back-end code, so we're even. I'm joking too, but maybe. The goal is to not get too technical, but the main goal is to like start the conversation around what are we looking for? Why did we leave a comment? What kind of comments is this? And all of those decisions we make when we make code review. And so we'll see what happens. Yeah. All right. So there's a couple of things on the show and tell agenda. Feel free to add something last minute if you want to. But I was going to kick this off, not pointing to the specific code review. I'll do that on point B, but I was going to just share my personal code review process that has helped me out tremendously. So let me go to my profile where I wrote this down in my README. So here's my favorite way to efficiently review MRs. And part of this is just because of the way that I'm bent. I find that multitasking is a trap for me because I will never finish my original task. So I have to instead try to really, really focus. So whenever I start doing code reviews, I'm shifting to code review mode. It is really difficult for me, and maybe you find this helpful. It's really difficult for me to be doing my own work and then on the side doing a code review or something like that, and I just won't end up getting anything done. So I have to shift to review mode. I'm closing all noise tabs, everything that isn't about helping me code review right now, so that I can stay focused. And so then I also just have bookmarked a list of the MRs I need to review, and I open that up. So then the other thing I wanted to share, and this was really helpful for me, and I have a feeling it might be helpful for others as well. I've recently gotten really disciplined with starting a timer when I do code reviews. Now this looks like a ridiculous amount of time to take on a code review, and by ridiculous I mean ridiculously small. But I use like 15-minute to 10-minute increments just to measure how long something has taken. So if I find myself having to reset this like 2 to 3 times on one code review, that's a really good signal to me. I need to try to wrap this up and push this on because this is a lot, and maybe I need to delegate something here. So a lot of MRs I can actually try to fit in this schedule in this time frame because we get a whole bunch of really, really small contributions that are pretty easy to verify in a small amount of time. But for the medium-sized MRs, I expect like 2 to 3 15 to 10-minute blocks. And if there's a really large one, I'll probably write a plan for like, I need to look at these things, and then each one of those blocks, I'll have to time box in some way. I actually also have
a question here.
Yeah, what were you saying?
At what point do you say this is too big? Split it.
This is too big, split it. But that's a really good question. It's such a good question that do you mind if I add it to the agenda for us to get to?
Yeah, please. No worries.
Okay. And I think that was the other thing I wanted to point. That was the other point I wanted to make here is I said show and tell, but this is also a great place to ask questions. So I should probably say and questions. James, was that you? That I thought I recognized your voice.
Yeah, I'll add it. Yeah.
I didn't see your video pop up. So all right. What point is the MR too big? That's a great question. Okay, once I start the timer, that's when I'm actually starting on things. And I'll read the context. But I also, when I say read the context, I'm like reading the description and the other comments before I jump into the code, just so that that context is near the front of my brain. But then I'll review the code locally. I actually hardly ever review the code on the MR diffs. I use that to just leave the comments. But I'll curl the diff from the URL, and then I'll apply it onto my master branch locally. This has a really nice added benefit of I don't have to keep checking out branches, and my GDK stays in a nice state where it's not, I don't know, like dropping and adding migrations because I'm going back and forth in the Git commit history. So I keep master checked out, and I just apply the diffs as I'm reviewing them. And so then I found myself, I kind of have, I start with just looking at the high level. So not looking at how functions are written. I'm kind of just looking what all the files we touched, and is anything sticking out here? Are we touching some like notoriously fragile files? Are we doing a shotgun change where it's something really small, but we ended up changing 11 files? And then I'll do just a high level where I'm looking at the test coverage of, based on all the files we changed, I would expect to see some sort of like similarity with all the unit tests that would have changed. And then the line for line read through is where, okay, I'm gonna go through every line, and there's might be some gotchas where we're calling undesirable patterns and methods with Apollo libraries or other things like that that are hard to lint for, but we still want to try to avoid. And the line for line is also helpful for me to see if there's potential user-facing issues, because, hey, could a value be null here and we're not checking it? And then that'll cause me to go down a line and try to read through the code or even just recreate a user-facing bug based to confirm or invalidate a hypothesis that, oh, this line might be off. And so based on looking at the code, I kind of then have a list of things I want to manually test, because the whole point of this is to ensure some sort of quality with the user. So I will end up doing a bit of manual exploratory testing, but that's based on notes I've written as I was doing these different level read-throughs. And so then if it's not ready to merge, I convert these notes to comments and pass it on. So that's my approach to code review. This is definitely a little flexible based on the code review. I'm not super strict to that, but when things get really big, it's helpful for me to break it into chunks of what I'm going to focus on. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions, or want to, tell me that I'm too particular?
I do have a thought. I'd like to share. First of all, thanks a lot for sharing the snippet under free. That will probably save me at least half an hour in my future days. I was not aware of that. But what I wanted to share is I am doing a very, very similar thing. But your number 7, the manual testing, is actually my number 1. Like the very first thing I do once I have this running. And this is something that I consider to be kind of a point of optimization. I personally would probably recommend, because many times I would find issues in there that will obviously affect the code. And it turns out that a lot of times we then ended up changing code. I maybe ask somebody to polish before, so that is something. If there is a user-facing issue, I want to know early, so I can adapt and maybe save some time on the review, because maybe I'll be telling a person we're not gonna need this method, so no need to polish it.
That's a really, really good point. And I would almost say like all of this flow is probably not really best thought of a unidirectional graph, because at any point you're like, something's off. It helps to short circuit and confirm or deny that, because if you can confirm this is off, yes, let's not waste time and let's not do the detailed review on something that's probably going to change. So that's a really, really good point. The reason I put this at the end is I find myself off so often. Because we do, like I would classify it as like white box quality assurance, where we're looking at the code and then we're testing something. And I find so often I can see a line of code or I can see a pattern, and I get a gut feeling that, oh, this is going to cause this issue. And so for me, often it is from the code where I can easily predict this is what I need to test. So that's why I do put this at the end. But yeah, that's a really good point, that at any point something isn't right, let's try to confirm that. And then, yeah, we could short circuit our review. Because if underlying code's going to change, we don't need to keep going down there. Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for chiming in, Yana. Lena, what's up?
I'll start raising hand because there are many of us. So I was wondering, like, whether you always do this manual testing. I don't usually, like, not most of the times I do, but like often it seems like the change might be so small and like there is so much to do to set up the environment. You just like go with it. You don't see like anticipate issues, and like most likely they won't have happened. So I was wondering how people treat that, whether it's you usually check out the branch and see what's happening, or you just like merge and it looks good enough.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to bring up. Does anyone have anything to add about the fact that I put for each review manual exploratory testing? That sounds like a daunting task.
People don't want to admit
So I don't test everything. I do test some things. I think it depends on how many files are changed. And also sometimes if someone hasn't left instructions on how to test it and it's not an area that I'm super familiar with, if it's that big of a change, I'll ask them like, how do I get this functional and push it back to the author. But I definitely have found issues in testing. I mean, my thought is if someone takes the time to write out the testing instructions and also has screenshots, I actually feel a lot more comfortable, like not necessarily going as deep in manual testing, because they've pretty much done some of the work by documenting it.
I think we do need to use a level of discretion, because gosh, so much can go wrong that you could spend your whole life just testing a small MR because there's so much context that so another reason like I add this at the end here is usually I have some specific things I'm concerned about. It's not like I'm looking for, it's not, there is the like the happy what's the word I'm thinking of? There's like the smoke test where I'm just going to run this, and if anything pops up, we'll see. But usually looking through the code, I'll have a note of things of like, I'm concerned about this. And so then I can see through the MR description if someone did test that path. But if not, there's nothing wrong with me bringing it back to the author of, hey, just a question. I'm a little concerned about this. We tested this thing out under this context. Could you share a screenshot about it? So I don't necessarily have to be the one manually testing things. But if I get a feeling that like, oh, what about this? Let's not just stuff that feeling. We can add it as a comment, even a non-blocking comment based on how it is. And I think that's well received. What do you think, Lena?
I don't know. I want to hear. I want to hear your thoughts. I have another theme. So, like the item number 8, you say that if necessary, convert notes to actionable comments. So, does it mean sometimes we just like discard the comments that you seem like not very important and like not necessary? Because myself, if I write a comment and like I will feel bad if I don't leave this comment, because I see maybe it's not that critical, but I will I don't feel comfortable this will go into the code base even though it's not critical. So maybe
I leave non-blocking comments a lot, but it does take a level of discretion of knowing sometimes that can, in some circumstances, just be extra taxing to the contributor. If an MR has gone so long and then I finish it off with a block of non-blocking comments implying how much longer it could have gone, that may not, sometimes I have to read the situation of it's some things better left just unsaid, and maybe. But I definitely lean towards saying all the things and just flagging it as this is non-blocking, so don't worry about it. I'm just thinking out loud. I'll say that a lot too. I'm just thinking out loud. And I think that given our values, like we want to lean towards that level of transparency of thinking out loud. So I interpret that to mean, yes, comments don't necessarily have to be actionable. It's a description of how I want to word the comments. But if it's a non-blocking thought, I leave a lot of those. So yeah, that's a good point. Cool. Thanks. Well, I'm gonna move on to other parts of our agenda. Thanks for letting me share that. And maybe now is past so much time that Natalia will be here to present her point. But if not, you all will have to put up with me a little longer. I'm sorry. So I wanted to share something I came across in an MR from a community contributor. It's really nice. On the single file editor, they can make a change and hit the commit changes button, and it shows a nice little loader now. Before it didn't do that. So now it actually will disable and show a cool loader. So this thing works. And I actually like jQuery, so this doesn't bother me. I'm joking. But what did stick out to me was all of these utility classes that we're throwing into here. The co-location of utility classes represents something. And our single source of truth for how we want to present buttons and loaders and stuff are our view components. So we have Haml view components and Bootstrap components. Putting these one off here just is not the best maintainable way, because as we change what our loaders need to do, we'll obviously miss this, and there'll be some consistency issues, or if there's a bug that we need to fix with our original implementation. So even though this is all working, this isn't the single source of truth for this kind of thing. So what I recommended was adding a hidden button but using our single source of truth function to render a button that's hidden by default, but has the certain state of where it's loading and disabled. And that's what the JavaScript will do, or we'll just toggle that on and off. So we're having duplicate calls to this, but that's way better than duplicating our encapsulated logic, is my thinking on that. So the main point is this, like, hey, while we're looking at code and understanding maintainability, try to identify and respect and find ways to uphold single source of truths for concepts. I'm pausing for effect. All right.
I have a question. So I noticed on your reviews you often leave the patch to apply. So I use it often like for community contributors because I just don't want to go back and forth. Sometimes they misunderstand like what I want from them, and they might not have all the like internal knowledge. I don't know whether it's very setting suggestions and just let people do how they feel it should be implemented, or provide them this patch. And if you provide the patch, it's like more work for yourself as a reviewer.
Yeah, I end up leaving lots of patches, mainly as like a communication tool, because I feel like code speaks louder than words. So because I review locally, actually, it's really easy for me to create patches. I'm like looking at it and I'm like, this is what it could look like. And I generate the patch and I paste it. And that workflow works really nicely for me because I don't have to try to decode into grammar a change I'm suggesting. And this enters a sticky situation where with community contributors, this is expected. Like there's a little bit of like mentoring and handholding that happens. And other MRs, like how much has been patch derived that maybe it's worth having another set of eyes, because maybe now I've ended up technically contributing most of it. But my main intent with patches isn't just, hey, here's the code, go for it, but I use it as a communication tool because it's so much easier, I think, to understand the code than words and human language. Gosh, riddled with errors and nuance. All right, that's a good question. All right, I'm gonna move to Natalia's. Is Natalia here? She's not here. Natalia's not here. I'm gonna move to Natalia's point. She brought up a really, really interesting, good topic. Here's the MR. I just realized I can't. Oh wait, this isn't a collapsible thing. Yeah, let me open up the MR diff to show the full thing here. So looking at this, and if you looked at it side by side, and eyeballing it, you see that one of the main things that's happening is these divs are being removed. The part inside the div is staying the same as far as my just eyeballing it, I can tell. But what Natalia wanted to highlight was sometimes in the unchanged part, there's trip mines that hey, there's patterns that we don't want to do, and somehow they ended up in master, and now they're kind of unrelated to this main change, but it'd be really nice to fix it. So those are always really interesting situations to bring up, but specifically the one that she brought up was this V model is a view directive that tells Vue to magically keep this thing in sync and will write to this property in the component, and we'll read it. The child component will end up reading from this property too. But this is actually not a property or a data, it's actually computed. And that's a significant don't do this in Vue, and can create some unintuitive behavior. And so even if everything all works, we're still interested in things staying to work, continuing to work. And so Natalia did, she made a good but tough call of, hey, I know this is unrelated to this MR, but we need to fix this. And so this is where that nested property of the computed object is coming from, and the V model will keep writing to this and will try to write to the computed, and that can cause Vue issues. So what's tough is we have linters for like this. I think if you just try to throw a computed in there, we have linters for that. But for something nested, like it looks like our linter doesn't quite catch it. And that also highlights like the robots need human oversight. Yep.
For now, at least.
For now, at least. Soon, I guess the humans need robot oversight. So there's a symbiotic relationship there for sure. Yeah. Cool. All right, now we have time for James. You brought up a great question. Oh, Lena, please.
Sorry. So with this kind of situation, like you often, like sometimes we see the errors that are not related to the MR directly, and I often get the pushback, kind of like I didn't touch that, I didn't introduce that, I don't want to break it, something like that. And I understand it. So if the person comes to fix the CSS class, they don't want like to fix the computed issues, for instance, because it's more, you need to give it more thought. So you go on with creating the follow-up. Who is responsible for this follow-up? So because I often feel like if it's my MR, I have to fix it. Like on the other hand, if I don't fix it, it will hang around somewhere and it will be outdated in 2 years. The bot will ping you. So how people approach this?
Yeah, at 44,000 issues, it's always a little. It's a funny feeling when you create a follow-up. I've seen good success if you create the follow-up and you ping the relevant team and you say, this is something we really need to clean up really soon. And it's this weight. I see if you go through those channels, it takes time to figure out who to ping and all that. But I see that being helpful. I've in the past have created the follow-up MR myself. So if I'm like, oh, we really should fix this. I know you really want this, get this merged. I can clean this up. It's just this one line of code. I make that trade-off decision of, is it worth holding this up? Should I push this forward? And can I create this MR to fix this thing myself really quickly? That's one option too. I think what Natalia did here also helps uphold a value that we want to keep things tidy, and so rather than saying like, oh, well, this isn't my code and just hands off, like let's try to keep things tidy as we get close to it. And if there's things to tidy up, let's just have a good attitude of keeping things tidy. And I think that's going to be really helpful at promoting the long-term health of the code base.
There she is.
Yeah.
Thank you for presenting, Paul. I just
Oh,
joined.
there you are, Natalia. Oh, yes. Okay.
Sorry for being extremely late.
Oh, you're good. Yeah, we just finished talking about it, and yeah, the main takeaway, and if you want to chime in any other takeaways, was even though this just happened, the MR was changing, not directly this, it happened to touch it. We want to keep things tidy, and so that's I think that's a good value to and culture to continue to promote across the code base, because we're not going to get to our 44,000 issue backlog. Do you have anything to add, Natalia?
I think you put it perfectly. One addition also to this is we shouldn't hesitate to block MRs over this. Yes, if it's severity 1, probably it's not a good reason to block. But in all other cases, even though this MR didn't change the logic in the unchanged lines, I still blocked it over this. And I believe it was a good idea because, again, 44,000 issues and our code base is huge. And if we leave this things out for the follow-up, I think we have a trend that I don't really like, that people create follow-ups and never return to them after the initial MR is merged. So in this particular case, I insisted on fixing this, and I believe we should.
Sam, what do you want to chime in with?
Yeah. One way we might get around this is instead of thinking about it as a follow-up, thinking about it as for this MR to happen, we need to first refactor the code and then we can do this change. So basically blocking this MR on the prequel, so to say, prequel issue, that this needs to be refactored first to get rid of the tech debt, and then this change can be made. Because it's sort of, this shouldn't happen because there's a tech debt that's preventing it from being touched or should have been touched.
I like the way of putting that. Yannick, what are you thinking?
I highly agree with the issues about the follow-ups that Natalia just pointed out. I was wondering in that context, how do we treat documentation? Like if I would be, or somebody would be working on an issue and we'll be finding out the docs are actually not adequate. What would you take? Would it be acceptable to update docs in a follow-up, or would you want to have this maybe not in the same MR, but basically having them in sync?
I'm a little scared of technical writers, so I'm afraid of them yelling at me. So I would try not to get on their bad side. They, I'm joking. You can do docs in a follow-up, but they do prefer to do it in the same MR, and that is a definition of done thing. So I'm pretty sure that's in our handbook, and it's, yeah, it can catch contributors by surprise of like, I thought this was gonna get in, but that's something we tried to treat as, no, this isn't done until we have the docs updated for it, the user-facing docs for it. Yeah. I believe that's correct. Did I say something incorrect? I think I'm right there. Feel free to check me on the handbook if I've misinterpreted that.
I'm searching through it, but if anybody has a link, feel free to put it in the chat.
Wherever we have like our definition of done, that's a phrase that'll show up somewhere. Let's just Google it. All right. While we're all here, let's just do it. Docs. Would this be an about thing? This might be an about thing. Definition of done. No, this is gonna be a docs thing. Yes. Let's see. Make sure, is that the only, here we go. We use the following definition of, no, this is a different thing. Okay, it does say documentation reviews should take place as soon as possible, but they should not block a merge request. But over here, yes, this under this definition done, here's MR merge, and it includes documented in the doc directory. But it looks like the review can be happen after merge.
I really like it to be done in the same one. I guess it's just a preference because I feel like it could get forgotten, or at least having the writer be able to have the context of the code. Like they may not be developers, but they still provide a lot of good feedback when everything is in the same context. It makes things easier to review.
And sometimes we have to document and include milestones. And if the documentation MR happens after the or that can cause issues of you do want these things merged together.
I also will say I've never had a documentation review like hold up an MR. Like it had never really blocked anything from merging. I try to get them involved early. If I go to review something and I see that they haven't been involved, I'll just sometimes just ping the person and be like, hey, can you also look at this from docs? Because I want to move the MR along too. And I don't want to have to be waiting as like a merger.
Yeah. I think a post merge review, if just depending on the severity of the situation, if we really need to get this in, post merge review for documentation is fine, but let's at least get some sort of draft there. That's doable.
Am I getting this right? Is there a contradiction in our docs? Because what you just highlighted said that for the merge requirements, docs should be available, but on the other paragraph, it said as soon as possible.
I mean, between 15 and 19 is. I think it's the review in 19 that's not supposed to block.
Ah, okay.
No, I'd interpret it as
Okay.
make sure it's at least there, but maybe it's not reviewed from a technical writer, but it's already there and can be improved on like afterwards, maybe.
Okay, that does make sense.
Cool. That's a good question. James has asked a great question. We didn't ask it yet, did we? I've lost track of time. Okay. James, do you want to verbalize this question? Do you have more context around it? Do you have a specific MR that you're thinking about?
Oh, I got it too. I had to make a diagram for it.
Oh, nice.
Hang on. Let me find the. Sorry, I'll find the link in a minute. But I was working on a feature, realized it was far too big for one merge request. So my question was like, when you're reviewing, how do you tell if it's too big? At what point do you say, wait, no?
Yeah.
Because once you push back, then you're going to have to restart your merge, your review separately. So my first question is, how do you tell as a reviewer? And then my follow-up question is, I'd like more tips on how to do that as a developer.
Yeah, that's a good question. Does anyone have any thoughts on it?
I feel like there might be different perspectives on what big means for front end and back end. I find that front end changes tend to require a lot more files from just glancing at things. But if I'm looking at a code review and immediately upon looking at it, I'm like, oh, I don't want to look at this right now. Like, to me, that's maybe a flag that it could be too big. If I'm like, oh, I need to come back to this later. If there's 30 files changed, or maybe from the back end, it does have a database change. And if there's like 3 or 4 reviewers on it at once, like, depending on what it is, there's no hard and fast rules.
Yeah.
But generally, if I find like a pit in my stomach when I think about having to go back and look at it because of how many files there are or how big things are, then I'm like, maybe this is an opportunity to make this smaller.
Yeah. It is tough to go back to the contributor and that's but it's worth it. What were you gonna say?
So you said like if there are a few reviewers on it, so what so the code I was working on needed some refactoring. This makes sense. Refactor the code, single MR, but then the final feature that also in itself was quite big because it needed everything to be updated at the same time. Like the CSS needed updating, the test needed updating. We had to add the new Apollo mutation, all of these things in the same thing so that it all works. Not like nothing in it is standalone.
Yeah. There's somewhere in our docs, it is really hard to break things up when you are breaking it up horizontally slicing. Like we're going to add the tests in one spot. We'll do the Apollo code in one MR. We'll do the presentation code in one MR. Then one MR will put it all together. And that MR ends up being humongous because, yeah, you happen to touch everything. Sometimes you can grow the feature iteratively, keeping it all integrated with each step. And that's highly my preferable way to split MRs up would be if we need a brand
Can
new.
you say that again? Like had.
So they
was it
call that,
cut?
they would call that like vertical slicing. And I can share with you an example from one of my MRs in the past. And I don't know if I'll be able to get to it. Let me see. The top nav. Yeah, this might be it. Yes. So the way I approach this as a contributor, I treat code like sketching, and I try to like do a very, very messy draft where I'm touching everything just to like, this is a brain dump of all the stuff. So I call this the spike MR, where I am touching a lot of stuff. And so my spike MR ended up, having 37 file changes, touch back end, front end stuff was all over the place. And this was redesigning the menu dropdown. But then from here, like I can identify this is a cohesive chunk. I want to put this down. And so creating these kind of MRs that I don't really intend to merge, but gives me a vantage point of the blast radius of my code change, helps me plan out a way of how can I iteratively introduce this in cohesive steps. So part of it was, hey, we're going to introduce this one. We're going to introduce this one feature flag with this feature that doesn't even work. Like that's clearly one step. And then that required though, like updating all the specs too, to respect the feature flag. Like that's one big effort, especially because menu is used everywhere. And then there's this other little things that came up on top of it. And that's the other thing too, when things are large, scope creep does come into play. And so if you're not splitting things up, then your large thing will become larger. So for me as a contributor, it's really helpful if I know this is going to be non-trivial. I'm just going to do all the changes I think I need to do, as messy as I need to do them, in one MR for me to get a sense of the blast radius. And then also just going through and reviewing my code myself. And what Terry said, that's feeling of like, this is a lot. And the feeling I'm anticipating others to feel when they look at it of this is a lot is a really good signal and gets me thinking, how can I make this easy for reviewers? And that's, I think, one of the big deals too. If an MR is hard to review, that's kind of the good signal. It's too big if it's hard to review. But you also have to think about MRs are also chunks that we revert. And so if the MR is doing too much and there's an issue with it, would I be okay with reverting all of this? Like, so when we can't split things up as small as possible, that's another motivator as a maintainer I'm interested in of, hey, there's a really, really risky part to what we're doing here. And then there's a lot of other stuff. Can we move this risky part to its own thing so that if we had to revert that, we can just revert that one chunk? And you can revert individual commits and figure that out, but that's another thought for slicing things. I feel like I've talked a lot. Is there someone else want to add to this conversation?
I've seen this a couple of times when people try to sneak in some like little unrelated scene. So it's kind of a separate feature, but maybe it like just takes too much time and like to create a separate MR for this, and they just think like, okay, I'll add it here. Like it's not in scope, but like there is no sense like to create separate MR and go through this new round of reviews. So how do you feel about those like small features that are added among the other big things?
Yeah, that's interesting because we talked about the need to keep things tidy. And so those touch on things that aren't in scope. And so we want to, there's a balance there. But yeah, that's a good point, Lena.
So I also don't understand, like I understand you having the initial MR which has everything, but then each piece of this maybe needs to build on the previous piece, so you can't have everything in review all at once. Like I posted the link to the map of my MRs, so I have 3 MRs that each build on top of each other, and like all of the work was done 2 weeks ago. It's just like trying to split it out has been just a lot of learning. But like the final one, I can't have it in review because it's relying on 2 things before it, and it feels like it's going to be another couple of weeks by the time all of these reviews come through.
I'm so excited to share with you. No, you can. So that's actually how I can get large MRs merged quickly. You want your chain of branches to point to each other. And it is totally good and acceptable for part 3. So part 3 branch is going to point to part 2. And get that reviewed. Get it maintainer reviewed. Like just say, have a to-do. We can't merge this till part 2 is merged. And I usually leave a to-do comment of when this is merged, then I need to rebase and retarget this. But that's one way of like, yeah, if you have a really large MR, it could take a week plus to review. But if I have 3 small ones, they could actually get merged like in a couple of days. And I get those reviews happening in parallel. And I'm excited to tap into our engineering power at parallel.
That makes sense. Maybe it's my lack of experience, because there were a few things in that first base MR that shifted everything up. So that makes sense.
It is tough to manage. And everybody I don't think there's one right way to do it. Lots of people do different ways. I would not recommend doing any kind of like feature branch way of like, we're going to have a bunch of MRs that are all merging into this large feature branch that we then all merge at once. I did that once and I regret it. But yeah, that's a really good question. But also definitely feel free to reach out to others for help on how to split it. And if someone recommended splitting something, ask them for help on it. And that's really good.
Paul, if you could find an example for an MR that has such a dependency chain or branch chain, I'd say I'd be curious to see this.
Yeah,
because it's
so
especially the sync review I expect to be complicated.
So I do this. So like this so here are like a whole bunch of parts that can all be merged to master individually, but then I'll have like parts that are dependent on each other. And so I add these like traceability links to the top of my MRs all over the place. I want to make it so easy to merge my MR. I want to make you want to merge my MR. So I had both of these being reviewed at the same time, and I know like I then left comments. I added questions to UX for myself, but I left a comment of like, hey, when the parent and MRs merge, we got to rebase and retarget this one. So this one, ended up pointing to master, but originally it pointed to the part 1 branch that this one was pointing to. And so anytime I made a change here, I didn't have to do this rebase push song and dance thing. But I don't know. I like Git. I have fun with that. Does this make sense?
I do a similar flow where you have them kind of a few like linked to each other, and then you can set them up as blocking. I mean, there's sometimes cases where the one that's at the top, like that's pointing to master, there will be changes that have to be cascaded down to the MRs that would depend on it. But if it's small enough, then it's not that big of a problem. Like the MRs that you're chaining shouldn't be so, like, hopefully, I don't know. I feel like I still think front end code, y'all have a lot more to deal with times, but hopefully the changes that you make at the top level, if they're small enough, it shouldn't be that bad to cascade them down. And I have
Yeah.
a complicated relationship with Git,
Well,
but eventually we do get along.
I think you brought up a good point too, of when you do split things up, anticipate knowing where to draw the iteration boundaries, anticipate how those different parts may change. And if your parts are so connected with each other that if this thing changed, this thing's like, maybe those should actually be next to each other. And maybe it's more about like the implementation details is what we want to flesh out in another iteration or something. What's up, Sam?
I have like a technical question. So when you base like this part 2 on your part 1, do you put something in other than that to do comment to make sure it doesn't get merged into there? Or do you not? Is it okay if it gets merged into there before that?
Well,
Because we want to target it to master eventually, right?
so I put a to do comment and it is not targeting part 1. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's not targeting master. So the worst thing that happens is someone merges it into part 1. And I think that's happened. And that was like, you messed up my perfect workflow. But these are non-protected branches. So I'll just force push and go back to the state we were at. That's not a big deal. I guess it technically closed this MR if it's merged, and I'll have to create a new MR for all of that. But that to-do comment, I think that's only happened once. And after that, I started adding this to-do comment and making it really clear, like, hey, we're not merging this yet. This is just this next iteration waiting for this to be merged. And yeah.
I just saw Terry mention you leave it in draft mode, Terry. Does that hinder it from being merged at all?
Yeah, you can't merge draft
Okay.
MRs.
Oh, that's
So
good, yeah.
yeah,
cool
I leave
workaround.
things, I try to leave a few notes too at the top. That's like, this is in draft, like don't merge, but I'll leave it in draft. Because I think as a maintainer, if I see something in draft, my instinct is to say, hey, this is still in draft mode. Like, let me know when you want to merge it. Like, I don't want to change it because I feel like either that's a mistake and they can fix it, or they did it on purpose. And
Yeah.
then I don't want to merge it.
That's interesting. That's probably why I don't put in draft mode, because I want to wake up and see all of them merged. And there was like one time that happened and it was such a good feeling. So I don't.
Hunting for that dopamine rush.
I know. Oh, I'm always doing that. Well, cool. So I don't know if we have a whole lot of time to pair on the code review, but you did leave this in here, Lena, and so I don't want to disregard it. But is there any, maybe, do you want to present this? Maybe there's some questions that we could.
Yeah. This is more like front end change. I'm not sure this is interesting for.
Oh, that's totally fine.
Okay, so.
Do you want to share your screen, or I can drive and you can navigate me?
No, you can. I cannot run it locally, so you can, maybe you can try it. But like the main, so this is the major upgrade of the, like, one of the dependencies in GitLab, and I usually get like very scared when I get this assigned like major upgrade. So the but maybe
Yes.
here we can share the responsibility. So there are many of us,
Yeah.
and so this is the upgrade of ESLint plugin, and the pipeline is going fine. I see that the like ESLint job is doing fine. So like at this point, like I might feel the urge to merge this, and I'm wondering how I should approach it. So I check it out, see that the lint job is passing right, but maybe there are some new features that are added and that we want to introduce, maybe not in scope of this MR, but later. So
I am so crazy glad that you brought this up. This is such a great thing to talk about. Thanks for bringing this up, Lena. So I think what you mentioned sounds totally appropriate and great for this MR. For me, the big question is, what's the worst case scenario here?
Yeah, that it gets merged, or someone introduces a change, and then it gets merged, and master is broken. So
Yeah, it's broken master. That's probably the worst case. So making sure that people are rebased. So sometimes leaving a note of like, this is being merged. Make sure you rebase your MRs. That's important.
in the big channel, like front end channel, like we just merge the major upgrade and like make sure to rebase it might break your.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing about the pipelines to be aware of, but I don't think that this would be the case, would because we also have to be concerned about the FOSS pipeline too. But since this is just static linting, like it should include all the FOSS code. So I don't think that's an issue. These are the scariest MRs to me. These are the absolute scariest MRs. The like package upgrade where there's no code changes, but so much could go wrong.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. For this,
I
think
it's
the dev dependent.
sorry. Go on.
Oh no, what were you saying?
No, I was wondering like if no failure. So currently, like the GitLab is in a good state, like to be upgraded to this version of the plugin. So I'm wondering, sometimes like major versions introduce new features. How do we track them? Like and introduce, and if like something new was added, when do we add it to GitLab?
Like if a non-dev dependency, if an actual dependency had like a new feature or something?
No, I mean like for instance, the plugin added some, I don't know, new rule that we don't use yet, but we might want to use, and the pipeline is not failing, but eventually we may benefit from this new rule. So this doesn't have to be added in scope of this upgrade, right? This can be added
I mean,
later.
you could, but yeah, I usually let GitLab dependency bot just do its thing. But these package bumps are definitely known to cause user-facing issues. So we can't just totally trust GitLab dependency bot, and it does sometimes take understanding what's actually changed between the version numbers and their change log and stuff. So yeah, these thankfully this is just a dev dependency. So I think the worst that can happen, it sounds like you identified that really well, and I think that's a approach, and there's not really anything more to do here. I get so scared. It feels like, oh, we're updating YAML, and maybe there's a new bug in this version that we don't know about or whatever, and those things concern me. Thanks for bringing this up. This is a great example. And yeah, I think here it's just a matter of pipeline passing because it's a dev dependency.
Do you
one
go
thing
and look at what is changed? Because I've gotten those for like Go updates and things. I do go because it makes me extremely nervous. I do go and try to read through the what changed as best as I can, because it can be hard to digest that information, but at least to be like making sure there's no breaking changes that are called out that like concern me. And if I don't see any, then I put a note and be like, well, I looked. So I didn't see any breaking that were concerning or known issues. And then, you kind of did your best.
Yeah. I'll even go to the repo and see if there's issues. Like, are there big issues shown up on? But I don't expect. I know I have issues. I'm paranoid. I don't like merging MRs.
Paul, may I assign the view upgrade to view 2.7 to you? I just have the OpenMR to upgrade view, and
Oh
I just heard you. I just heard you don't like such MRs. There's so many changes to YARN law.
So if you don't want an MR merged, but you want to make it look like you're working on it, assign it to me. That's the thing to do.
That's the best one. Yep. fill your contribution graph with all the comments.
Yep. All right. Hey, thanks everybody. Thanks for kicking off our weekly workshop. I'm looking forward to next time. Maybe next time we can dedicate more time to doing pairing on code review. Lena, thanks so much for bringing this one up. This was I think insightful still. So you all have a great rest of the day. Adios.
Adios. Happy Friday.